Welcome to our weekly Parsha Shir and podcast. This week is Parshas Shoftim. As we are now already in the month of Elul, I want to take this opportunity to wish you all a ksiva v'chasima tova, l'shana tova mesuka. May you and your families be written for a good year, a year filled with all of Hashem's most wonderful brachas for you and your families in a physical sense and a spiritual sense. May it be the best year ever. And finally, of course, the year of the ultimate Geula. As an introduction to this week's Parsha Shir and podcast, I want to begin, this week's Parsha, of course, is Parsha Shoftim. I want to begin with something, parts of the story that the Torah talks about in Sefer Shmuel Beis. I'm in Sefer Shmuel Beis in Perek Gimel. At the beginning, start at the beginning of the Perek and go through just some of the highlights of this important story. So at this point here, in Sefer Shmuel Beis, Perek Gimel, we're talking already after the passing of Shaul HaMelech. Now, one would have assumed that all the animosity and all of the deadly strife and friction between the monarchy of Shaul and the monarchy of David that the Torah discussed at such great length in Sefer Shmuel Aleph, well, one would have assumed that once Shaul HaMelech passed, it would all be over. It would all be behind us because Shaul HaMelech and his three sons are killed at battle. One would think it's the end. But unfortunately, it wasn't the end. After Shaul HaMelech's passing, Shaul HaMelech's commander-in-chief, the head of his army, a man named Avner ben Ner, about whom, by the way, the Torah says that he was also Shaul HaMelech's cousin. Avner ben Ner appoints Shaul HaMelech's son, Ishboishes, as Shaul HaMelech's successor. Avner ben Ner crowned Shaul HaMelech's son, Ishboishes, as king after Shaul HaMelech's passing. In doing so, of course, there is now at least what appears to be two kings, two monarchies among the Jewish people. The continuation of the strife, of the struggle between the monarchy of Shaul and the monarchy of David continues, because Avner, his commander-in-chief, Shaul's commander-in-chief, appoints Shaul HaMelech's son, Ishboishes, as king. And actually, the Jewish nation themselves are split. Many are still loyal to Shaul and his house and his family, by extension, in this case, to Ishboishes, the new king. And Avner ben Ner, the commander-in-chief of Shaul HaMelech, is an incredibly mighty warrior, a great protector of Jewish people, fierce in battle, has many troops under him. And his support of Shaul HaMelech remains steadfast and remains consistent. David HaMelech also has his supporters, if you will, those who are loyal to him. And David HaMelech also has a very famous commander-in-chief. David HaMelech's commander-in-chief, of course, is his nephew, the famous Yoav ben Tzruya. Yoav is also at this stage, tremendous, mighty warrior, leading David HaMelech's troops. And really between Yoav, who is loyal to David's commander-in-chief, and Avner, who is loyal to Shaul's commander-in-chief, there is really this tremendous strife. Actually, it was really a civil war between the two that went on for years after Shaul HaMelech himself had passed. The Torah here in the beginning of Perek Gimel begins by saying that despite the civil war that went on between Avner on Shaul's side and Yoav on David's side, with time, but the Possuk says, "Vatihi hamilchama aruka," although this civil war between Jews, and again the Jewish nation, were split among themselves, between what was seen as Shaul's monarchy and David's monarchy, although it went on for a long time, ben Beis Shaul, between the house of Shaul, ben Beis David, the David hoylech v'chazek. Nevertheless, momentum was on David's side. With time, David's support and David's monarchy became stronger. Ubeis Shaul holchim v'dalim. Actually, Shaul's supporters, the supporters at this stage, again, Shaul has passed. So these are supporters of Ishboishes and Avner. Holchim v'dalim. With time, momentum is working against them. They're becoming smaller and weaker, and they're actually shrinking. All right. Again, the battle between the armies of Avner and the army of Yoav, the armies of Avner and Yoav is the civil war between them was bloody, and many people were killed. In fact, even one of Yoav's own brothers are killed by Avner. Don't want to get into that now. The part that I do want to get into is that at some point something happens. There is friction. Again, not relevant for right now, the details. There's friction between Avner and Shaul HaMelech's son. In other words, his own king, the one he's loyal to, Ishbosheth. There's friction between the two. They have an argument. Again, the details are not relevant for now. Avner has an argument with his own king, with Ishbosheth, that he himself coronated as king, as the successor of Shaul HaMelech. Avner and Ishbosheth argue between the two of them. And Avner decides to switch sides, if you will. Avner decides to declare his new loyalty to become loyal to David HaMelech. In doing so, this effectively would end the civil war between the Jewish people. It would effectively, ultimately unite all of Klal Yisrael under the leadership, under the Melucha, under the monarchy of David HaMelech, and it would really be a great moment in bringing all Jews together. It had the potential to be really an incredibly decisive, pivotal moment in the monarchy of David HaMelech. I'll soon tell you what went wrong, but at least at this stage, Avner, when he decides to join David HaMelech, this has the potential to become an incredibly uniting experience among Jews. So the Possuk says, again, Shmuel Beis, Perek Possuk Beis, that Avner sends malachim, he sends messengers to David, and he basically tells him, listen, Korsa brischa iti, let's you and I make a covenant, v'hina yodi imach, I will support you, l'hosev elecha es kol Yisrael, we will unite all the Jewish people, all under David HaMelech's rulership, and effectively the monarchy of the Melucha, the royalty in Shaul HaMelech's family, was over. David HaMelech agrees under a certain condition. Again, David's condition is not relevant for now. David HaMelech agrees, and Avner and his men come to David HaMelech, and David HaMelech makes for them a feast. They sit together and they have a meal. After the meal, Avner tells David, HaMelech, I need to go, and I need to gather together all the Jews. I need to tell them that I, Avner, have now joined your David's ranks, and this way we'll bring all the Jews together, and all the Jews will declare you David as king. David is very happy to hear this. He agrees, and he sends Avner off to go and effectively unite all of Klal Yisrael under Malchus David. Now, the one who was not present when Avner finally has this face-to-face meeting with David, they sit and they have a meal together. And Avner declares his loyalty to David and his intention to go and unite all the Jewish people under the Malchus of David, and receives David's blessings to go and do so. The one who is not there when this meeting of these two forces takes place was Yoav. Yoav was out fighting David HaMelech's wars. When Yoav comes back and he hears that while he was away, the friction between Avner and David has been repaired, and Avner has declared his loyalty to David, and David has accepted it, and Avner has gone out to unite Klal Yisrael, Yoav ben Sruya, David HaMelech's nephew and commander-in-chief, is very, very unhappy about this. He's suspicious of Avner. He doesn't believe that Avner's intentions are pure. He tells this to David HaMelech. He tells it to him straight. He tells David HaMelech, Me'osiso, he says to David, what have you done? You've allowed Avner to come to you. Avner is here for purposes of espionage. He's a spy. He wants to see where you're coming and where you're going. In the end, says Yoav to David, if you accept Avner, he's going to kill you, he's going to ruin you, and he's going to get the whole Jewish nation to follow Ishbosheth, to whom Avner is really loyal. David HaMelech does not respond to all of these accusations of Yoav, and Yoav, his nephew and chief of staff, leaves. Unbeknown to David, Yoav summons his Avner to come back, to return. He sends a message and tells Avner to return. When Avner returns, Yoav, the commander-in-chief of David, kills Avner who was the commander-in-chief of Shaul, then of Ishboishes, who wanted to make peace with David, Yoav killed Avner. Again, there's many reasons why Yoav killed Avner. One of them was because Avner had killed Yoav's brother, so Yoav considered himself a Goyal Adam. But be it as it may, what's relevant for now is that Yoav killed Avner. David is infuriated by the fact that his own commander-in-chief he sees this as a disloyalty, has been disloyal to him by killing Avner, and David makes it clear that this was not his intention, that this was not his instructions, and that this act of Yoav killing Avner, Yoav himself will have to bear responsibility for it. David says, this is not on me, this is on Yoav. All right. Now, David is profoundly concerned. It's important to understand this. David is profoundly concerned that the fact that Yoav killed Avner is going to backfire. What's David concerned about? Again, at this stage, Avner still has tremendous following among Klal Yisrael. Avner is still seen by large contingencies of the Jewish people as their fierce protector and the one who's protecting them from their enemies. So David is concerned that when people hear that his chief of staff, his commander-in-chief, Yoav, killed Avner, that the Jewish people are going to revolt against him, David. So David makes it clear, he orders all of his men to tear their garments and to mourn the death of Avner. David HaMelech himself participates in the Levaya and the Hespedim over Avner. David mourns the death of Avner. But David is not satisfied with all of this, and he wants to make it clear that Yoav killing Avner was not done under his David's mandate. So David HaMelech does something shocking. I'll tell you what he does, and then I'll tell you why it's shocking. What David HaMelech does is he publicly curses Yoav for what he did, for killing Avner. It's shocking because until this point, Yoav, again, besides for the fact that he was David HaMelech's nephew, Yoav fought all of David HaMelech's wars. Yoav was a mighty warrior. Yoav was instrumental in protecting David HaMelech from Shaul HaMelech and his attempts to kill David for all this time. And yet at this point, David turns around and in an effort to distance himself from what Yoav has done to Avner, again, apparently to avoid civil war, to avoid a revolt from the Jewish people who would revolt against David for the fact that his commander-in-chief Yoav killed Avner, David cursed Yoav. Notwithstanding all that Yoav had done for David until now. What was the curse? He said, quote, Al yikores mi beis Yoav, let there never be removed from the house of Yoav. Let there be fall upon the house of Yoav. Zov, Mitzoira, people who are ill, with illnesses of Zov, bodily flowings of bodily fluid, Mitzoira, individuals with tsaras, Machzik bapelech, those who hold on to sticks because they cannot walk, Neufel bacher, of those who fall at the sword, Vachasar lechem, and those who are so impoverished that they have no bread. David cursed Yoav and Beis Aviv that his descendants would be ill, would be physically ill, as Zovim, as unable to control their bodily functions. Matzur, that they would have tsaras, translated sometimes as leprosy. Machzik bapelech, crippled, walking with walking sticks. Neufel bacherev, should be hunted down by the sword. V'chasar lechem, and so impoverished that they have no bread. This was David's curse to Yoav, that his descendants should be saturated with Zovim, Mitzoiroim, cripples, people who will fall by the sword, and people who are so poor that they lack bread. As if this isn't shocking enough that David cursed Yoav, it gets worse, because as we all know very famously, on David's deathbed, when David is about to die, he summons his son Shlomo, who would become his successor, Shlomo HaMelech. And David tells Shlomo to make sure to kill Yoav. And David articulates specifically that one of the reasons why he wanted his son Shlomo to kill Yoav was because Yoav killed Avner. So upset was David that his nephew and commander-in-chief Yoav had killed Avner, that he didn't just curse him, but in the end, right before David died, he told his son Shlomo to make sure that he would one day execute Yoav. And David says one of the reasons why he wanted his son Shlomo to kill Yoav was because Yoav had killed Avner. Okay. There's one more part to this story, which is told by the Gemara in Masechta Sanhedrin, Daf Mem Ches. This part I want to focus specifically on the curse. The curse that David HaMelech gave Yoav, that there should be from his house, Zov, Metzoira, cripples, Neufel, Bachera, V'chasar Lechem. The Gemara tells the following story about what happened in the end with this curse. The Gemara says, here's what happened. Shlomo HaMelech, after David dies, has an instruction, last will and testament from his father David, to go and kill Yoav. So he makes it clear, he makes his intentions clear that he's going to kill Yoav. Yoav, afraid for his life, runs to the Mishkan. The Mishkan at this time is in Shiloh, and he grabs onto the corners of the Mizbeach in an effort, in a belief that as long as he was holding onto the corners of the Mizbeach, nobody could kill him. All right. Was he correct? Was he not correct? The Gemara discusses it at great length, but this is what Yoav did. Shlomo HaMelech sends his commander-in-chief, Shlomo's commander-in-chief, a man named Benayahu ben Yehoyada. All right, not for now. Shlomo HaMelech sends Benayahu ben Yehoyada to go to Yoav and to go and kill him. And he finds Yoav standing there, holding on to the corners of the Mizbeach. Says the Gemara, open your hearts. Says the Gemara, Benayahu, Shlomo HaMelech's commander-in-chief, comes to kill Yoav. Again, this is Shlomo HaMelech's first cousin. And Yoav says, wait. Before you kill me, he says, we have something we have to figure out. Says Yoav, quote, I want you, he tells Benayahu, he tells the commander-in-chief, go and tell Shlomo HaMelech, Tarti loy savid bahu gavra. You're not going to be able, says Yoav, through Benayahu, to Shlomo HaMelech, you're not going to be able to instill upon me, to force upon me, both consequences. Both the curse of David and the instruction of David that I be killed. It's one or the other. Either, says Yoav, I remain cursed by David, that my descendants should be Zovim, Metzoiroim, Machzikei Bapelech, Neuflim Bechera V'chasar Lechem. My descendants should be ill, poor, hunted down, ill, crippled, or I get killed. But if I get killed, says Yoav, then that's my consequence, then that's my punishment for killing Avner. If I'm cursed, then that's my punishment for killing Avner. I don't get two punishments for one crime. Can't do both. So Yoav tells Benayahu, listen to this. So Yoav tells Benayahu, go back to Shlomo HaMelech and tell him, it's one or the other. It's either the curses of David, your father, or I die. If you're going to kill me, says Yoav, remove the curses. If you want the curses to stay upon me, Yoav, then let me live. I'm not going to take them both. It's one or the other. Why not? The Gemara doesn't say. But this Yoav makes it clear that he doesn't deserve two punishments for one act of killing Avner. Benayahu doesn't know what to say, right? He wasn't sent to enter into debate, at least not at this stage. He was sent with an instruction to kill Yoav. So he goes back to Shlomo HaMelech. And he tells Shlomo HaMelech, Yoav is standing there, Mishkan Shiloh, holding on to the corners of the Mizbeach, saying, which one's it going to be? What's my punishment for killing Avner? David's curses or death? Can't be both. Says Shlomo HaMelech to his commander-in-chief, Benayahu, Yoav is right. It's not going to be both. My father, says Shlomo HaMelech, my father, David HaMelech, instructed me to kill Yoav, and so I will. Go back and kill Yoav. As far as the curses are concerned, says Shlomo HaMelech, as far as the curses are concerned, says Shlomo HaMelech, the curses that my father David cursed Yoav, Shlomo HaMelech says, I take those curses upon myself. Upon me, says Shlomo HaMelech, and my descendants and my family will befall all of my father David's curses. Yoav must die. Benayahu ben Yehoyada, Shlomo HaMelech's commander-in-chief, took Shlomo HaMelech's instructions, goes back to the Mishkan, and has Yoav executed. just as Shlomo HaMelech, his king, commanded him, just as David HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech's father, commanded him. Yoav was executed. And the Gemara concludes, Omar Rav Yehuda Omar Rav, Kol Klolois Shekilal Davides Yoav, all of those curses, 5 curses that David cursed Yoav, Niskaimu Bezaroi Shel David, they boomeranged, they backfired, they came right back, and they were all fulfilled upon the descendants of David. And the Gemara goes on to list, David had a descendant, and the Gemara goes through the whole thing. David had a descendant who was Azov, this was Rehoboam. He had a descendant who was a Metzorah, this was Uziyahu. He had a descendant who was crippled, who had to walk with a walking stick, this was Asa. He had a descendant who was killed by a sword, this was Yoshiyahu. And he had a descendant who was so poor that he was starving, he didn't have a piece of bread to eat. This was Yechoniah, as we'll discuss, as we'll learn about soon. All of the curses that David heaped upon the head of Yoav, for Yoav killing Avner, because David was seeking to distance himself from Yoav, gave him all of these curses, says the Gemara, Kulam Niskaimu Bezaroi Shel David. They all came back to David HaMelech's own descendants. All 5 of them. All right, the Gemara concludes. This is the reason, says the Gemara, why people say, Hainu da Amri Inchi. This is why the people say, Teheiluta v'loi teheila'ota. Be the one who's cursed, not the one who issues the curses, because the curses will backfire upon the one who uttered them in the first place. As they did in this case with David HaMelech, who cursed Yoav, and in the end, all of those curses came back to him. This is my introduction. All right. If you have a Chumash in front of you, open up to Parsha Shoftim, all the way at the end of the Parsha. Almost at the end. Perek Chof Aleph, Devorim Parsha Shoftim, Perek Chof Aleph, Posuk Aleph, Ki Yimotzei Cholol, Bo Adom Asher Hashem Elokecha Nois L'chol Rishto. If you find a corpse somewhere in Eretz Yisrael, the land that Hashem has given you to inherit, this is the famous mitzvah of Eglo Arufa, a dead Jew is found somewhere in Eretz Yisrael. Noifal Basada, he's lying in the field, Loi Noida Mihiko, it's clear that he's been murdered, but nobody knows who murdered him. Says the Torah, the elders and the judges shall go out, says Rashi. This is referring to Sanhedrin HaGodel, the great Sanhedrin of 71 judges who sat in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Lishkas HaGozis. They would go out, they would measure which city was closest to the corpse, to this Jewish man who had been found dead in the field. Should be the city which was closest to this corpse. That the elders, the Sanhedrin of that city, would take an eglas bokar, a calf. It had to be 1 year old. It had never been worked. It had never carried a yoke. The elders of that city, of the closest city, would take this calf to a nachal eson, to a valley that was rough, that had never been plowed, that had never been planted, had never been cultivated. And they break the neck of the calf in this valley. Possuk hey, v'nikshu ha-koyanim b'nei Levi, the koyanim approach, kivon bochar Hashem elokecha l'shorosai, because Hashem had chosen them to serve Him, u'levorech b'shem Hashem, v'al piyem yiyeh kol riv v'chol nogan, because they, the koyanim, are responsible for any strife and any affliction that befalls the Jewish people. V'choil ziknei ha'irahi, and all the elders of that city, the close city, ha'krovim elacholol, yirchatzu es yedeim, they washed their hands, alo eglo ha'arufa b'nochal, upon this calf, this calf whose neck has been broken in the valley. V'onu v'omru, and all together they would make that famous declaration. They would say, the elders would say, Yodeinu lo shofchu es adom hazeh, our hands didn't spill this blood. V'eineinu lo ro, and our eyes didn't see the murder. And the Kohanim would say, Kaper la'amcho Yisrael asher podiso Hashem, Almighty God, forgive the sin of your people. Val titein dam noki b'kerev amcho Yisrael, and do not allow innocent blood to be spilled among the Jews. When the Kaper la'adam, the Torah says, and they would be forgiven. Okay. There's one very important Rashi here. The Rashi is on Possuk Daled, where the Torah describes how they would take a calf. They would take it to in Nachal Eis, and they would take it to a valley that was rugged, that had never been worked, that had never been cultivated before. And Rashi says, quote, Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rashi gives the reason for this particular practice, for this mitzvah, which is, the Rabbi points out that this is rare. Rashi doesn't usually give us the reasons for the mitzvahs, but in this case, Rashi does. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what's the reason for the mitzvah? Quote, Tovoi eglo bas shnoso shaloi osus apeiros. Bring, says Rashi, quoting from the Gemara, bring a 1-year-old calf that's never had children. V'teoref, and break its neck. B'mokim she'eino osus apeiros, in a place, in a land that has never produced any fruit, that has never grown anything. L'chaper al harigosei shel zeh, to atone for the murder of this Jew, shaloi hinichuhu lasos peiros, who was gunned down, who was murdered in his prime, and was not allowed, was not given the opportunity to have offspring, to have peiros, to produce fruit. He was killed. He was murdered. He could have had peiros. He could have had fruit. He was killed, says the Torah. Now you need a kapora. What's the kapora? Bring a calf that has never had children. Break its neck in a piece of land that has never produced anything. This will be a kapora for the fact that this individual was denied the ability, the potential, bringing his potential into actuality of producing peiros. Okay. The Gemara asks, what do you mean it has to be a kapora, lechaper, al harigosei shel zeh, to atone for the murder of this one, shelo hinichu lasos peiros, who wasn't given the opportunity to produce peiros? What do you mean peiros? What kind of peiros are we talking about? Does this mean children, says the Gemara? Well, if it means children, I got a question. This is a Talmudic question. The Gemara says, if it means children, what about if the person who was killed was too old to have any more children? He was a zoken. Or he was a soris. He was physically unable to have children. Would there then still be a need, a mitzvah, to bring an eglo arufa, to break the neck of a calf in this place for an individual who was killed? Lo yinichu lasos peiros. They didn't give him the ability to have peiros. He couldn't have peiros even if he wasn't killed. He was too old, or he was physically unable. No, says the Gemara. That's not what peiros means. What does peiros mean, says the Gemara? Peiros means mitzvahs. Doesn't matter he was young, he was old. Doesn't matter he was capable of having physical children. He wasn't capable of having physical children. Doesn't make any difference. He was a yid. A yid is obligated to do mitzvahs. By being murdered before his time, apparently, lo yinichu lasos peiros, he's denied the ability of doing mitzvahs. The only kapora for this is through a calf who didn't produce peiros, having its neck broken in a land that never produced peiros. Kapora lachaper, to atone for harigosei shel zeh, who wasn't allowed to do more mitzvahs to produce more peiros. Okay. And here, of course, there is a Baal Haturim. The Baal Haturim is actually on Possuk Zion. Excuse me. Yeah, the Baal Haturim is actually on Possuk Zion. Possuk Zion speaks about the declaration that was made by the elders of the city, which was found closest to the corpse. Their declaration is, Yodeinu lo shavchu es adom hazeh, our hands have not spilled his blood. Before I read the Baal Haturim, I just want to highlight something. It's important to understand here how much attention, how much significance the Torah is giving to this individual who's been found slain in the field. Noifel basoda, no one knows who kills him. Think about who's involved in this. Number one, the Sanhedrin HaGadol, the Supreme Court of the Jewish people. The federal court, the Supreme Federal Court, if you will, that was in charge of the cases of all of Klal Yisrael. Number two, the Beis Din and all the elders of the city that were closest to the Cholol. Three, all the Kohanim who worked in the Beis HaMikdash, or they would also come out. Everybody got involved in this. The elders and the Kohanim would wash their hands, literally, alo eglo ha'arufa, upon this calf whose neck had been broken, and they would say, Yodeinu lo shavchu es adom hazeh. They would say, our hands have not spilled his blood. Says the Baal Haturim, if you look into the Possuk, the word, if you look into the Torah, the word shafchu is spelled in a very strange way. Shafchu is usually spelled shin fei chaf vav, shafchu. Here the Torah spells it shin fei chaf hey. As if the word would be shavcha. It's not shavcha, it's shavchu. So the word hey here is actually, it's completely completely out of place, if you will, at least on a surface level. Loi shavchu, says the Baal Haturim, open your hearts. Ksiv behei, the Torah writes it with a hey. Why? Shaloi naganu boi beheyetz be'oseinu. Because the elders who would have to declare that they were not responsible for the death of this individual, they'd have to say, Loino Ganu boy, we didn't touch him, not with one of any of our 5 fingers. He said, we didn't even with a little finger, we didn't touch him. So the Torah adds a hey, Loino Ganu boy, we didn't touch him with any of our 5 fingers. All right, that's the Torah adds a hey, very interesting interpretation. Another reason, Ki hanefesh, says the Baal Haturim, hanefesh yesh lo hey shemes. We're talking here about a murder, a Yid who was murdered, Rahman al-Islam. And we know from the Medrash that a nefesh, that a Yiddish neshama, has 5 names, right? It's called, very famously, it's called nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. So as an indication, in respect, in tribute to the 5 levels of the soul that have been affected here by this Jew's murder, the Torah adds a hey, as if to say they had to declare that they were not responsible for this death that affected all 5 attributes, all 5 levels of this individual soul. Okay. V'lachein, one more line in the Baal Haturim, hold on to your heads. V'lachein, since the murder of a Yid affects all 5 levels of his soul, V'lachein nosan David leYoav hey klolois k'shehorag la'avner. For this reason, because of this hey in the word shafchu, because of this idea that when you kill a person, you deny life to all 5 levels of the soul. Therefore, when Yoav killed Avner, David HaMelech gave him 5 curses. What were the 5 curses? That his descendants should be, among descendants there should be Zov, individuals who are ill and cannot control bodily emissions. Matzoira, they have skin afflictions that affect their skin. Machzik b'pelech, crippled, who have to walk with a walking stick. Neufel b'cherev, those who are victims of murder, struck down with a sword. V'choser lechem, and those who are impoverished and poor, they don't even have bread. Why 5? Simple, says the Baal Haturim. Of course 5, because just like the Torah adds the word hey here, shavchu, because when you murder somebody, when you murder a Yid, you affect all 5 levels of the neshama. So when David killed Yoav, David HaMelech gave him 5 curses. That from his descendants there should always be Zov, Metzoira, Machzik B'Pelach, Neufel B'Cherev, V'Chasar Lechem. Okay, this is what's written here in the Baal Haturim. Now, I'm going to ask you the 3 obvious questions in the Baal Haturim. In fact, the questions are so obvious, they sort of just like literally jump out of the page. Number 1, the Torah makes it clear that the reason why David cursed Yoav was not intrinsically because Yoav had killed Avner. David was trying to protect himself. David was afraid that the Jewish people would revolt against him when they heard that his commander-in-chief killed Avner. Avner was a fierce protector of Klal Yisrael. So David HaMelech, in an effort to save himself, wants to distance himself from Yoav and what Yoav has done, so he curses him. It's not inherently because Yoav had killed Avner. This wasn't in defense of Avner. This was to distance himself from Yoav. Why is the Baal Haturim saying that this was for Avner? It wasn't for Avner. It was in an effort to distance himself from David. It was an effort to distance himself from Yoav. Question number 1. Question number 2. What's it got to do with Yoav and Avner? The idea that murdering a Jew affects the neshama has 5 names, 5 levels. This is true with all Jews, as the Possuk makes it clear here in Parsha Shoftim. Somebody died in the field, we don't know who, doesn't matter who it is, even if it's a Zokin, a Soros, whatever the case may be, the Torah adds a hey because every neshama has 5 levels. What's it got to do with David and Avner? What's it got to do with Yoav and Avner? By that logic, whenever Yoav killed any Jew, and Yoav had many of those in his repertoire, David should have killed him for every Jew, not just Avner. What's it got to do with Avner? And then question number 3, the mother of all questions. The Baal Haturim is saying that the reason why David cursed Yoav with 5 curses is because Yoav killed Avner. But in the end, all of these 5 curses come back to David. In the end, this thing boomerangs. In the end, because David tells his son Shlomo to execute Yoav, so all of these 5 curses are accepted by Shlomo Melech back on the family of David. So they come back in the end. The Gemara says not to the one who is cursed, not to the one who's the victim of the curse, but to the one who issues the curse. So the whole argument of the Baal Haturim seems to backfire here. These 5 curses in the end, they do not fall upon the head of the murderer. They fall upon the head of the one who cursed the murderer. So if every so number 1, if every person who kills deserves 5 curses, then it's got nothing to do with Yoav, and it's got nothing to do with Yoav killing Avner. It has to do with any Jew who murders any other Jew. Question number 2, it doesn't seem to be David's motive in this case. David's motive in this case seems to be to distance himself from Yoav, to avoid civil war. And finally, the most powerful question of them all, if that's the case, what's the explanation for the fact that all these 5 curses run right back to David? And the Gemara says, David cursed Yoav. In the end, these curses came back to David. Rather be from the one who is cursed, as the Gemara, than the one who issues the curse. Because if you issue the curse, and in the end the curse is undeserving because some other consequence befalls the victim of your curse, the curses will come right back to you. And yet the Baal Haturim says no. Yet the Baal Haturim seems to be saying, David gives Yoav 5 klolos because Kisha Avner, when he killed Avner, because every neshama has 5 levels. So if every neshama has 5 levels, then Yoav, who kills Avner, deserves 5 curses. So why does Yoav in the end get absolved of these curses? In fact, the curses go right back to David and his family's house. They should have stayed on Yoav. And yet the Gemara says, the Torah says that that these curses went back to David and Melech. Okay. So let's recap. The Torah adds a hey in the mitzvah of Eglo Arufa. When the elders would wash their hands over this broken calf in this rugged valley, they would say, Yodeinu lo shavchu es hadam hazeh, our hands didn't spill this blood. Says the Baal Haturim, Shavchu is written with a hey. You know why? Because the neshama has 5 attributes, has 5 levels. Nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. It's not just 5 names, it's 5 faculties. You killed a yid, you affected, you ruined, you severed all 5 levels of the neshama. That's why the Torah adds a hey. Then says the Baal Haturim, by the way, this idea that there is 5 levels of the neshama, this is the reason why David cursed Yoav with 5 curses when Yoav killed Avner. 1 curse for each level of the neshama. And the question is, if that's the case, what's the curses have to do with Yoav? What do the curses have to do with Yoav killing Avner specifically, not everybody else? David is giving the curses seemingly because he wants to avoid a PR nightmare which could result in civil war. The Jews revolt against David. And in the end, all the curses come right back to David. They don't even stay on Yoav. And yet the Baal Haturim wants us to know from this that somehow this story of Yoav cursing David teaches us that when you kill a Jew, Rahman al-Islam, you get 5 curses. Okay. To explain this, we got to go deeply, profoundly into something that the Gemara says here in Sanhedrin, when the Gemara talks about how all of these curses come back to the family of David HaMelech. As I mentioned before, the Gemara goes through the whole thing, right? Zav, Metzoira, Machzik, Bapelach, Neufel, Becherev, Chasar Lechem. Zav is Rechavam. Metzoira is Uziyahu. Machzik, Bapelach is Asa. Neufel, Becherev, Yoshiyahu. The last of the five, Chasar Lechem, the one who bears the curse of Chasar Lechem, of being impoverished to the point where they don't have bread, the Gemara says, is a descendant of David and Shlomo, a king by the name of Yechoniah. Also sometimes in Torah, he's referred to as Yehoyachim. Okay. So here's the story, again, very briefly, of this individual, Yechoniah or Yehoyachim. Now, he's actually very famous for those of us who remember this from Megillas Esther, because he has a royal mention in Megillas Esther. In Megillas Esther, when the Torah introduces us to Mordechai, right, it says, Ish Yehudi Hoya B'Shushan Abir, there was this Yid, his name is Mordechai, gives us his family lineage, and then tells us his family story. Then tells us his history. What was the story of Mordechai? Who was Mordechai? Asher Hoglam Yerushalayim. He was forced into Golus from Yerushalayim. Im Hagoyla Asher Hogla. When the Jewish people were sent into Golus, Yechoniah Melech Yehuda, together with a king, Yechoniah Melech Yehuda, descendant of David and Shlomo. Asher Hegla Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel, that Nebuchadnezzar himself had forced into Golus. So the story, again, what's relevant to know for now is that Yechoniah is the successor of his father, a king called Yehoyakim. Now Yehoyakim and Yechoniah, although they were descendants of David and Shlomo Melech, they were terrible, terrible Rishoyim. So much so that the Rabbeinu Shalom had sworn that they would have no descendants, and that the Scion, the monarchy of David, would end with them. Yehoyakim, Yechoniah's father, is brutally murdered by Nebuchadnezzar, and after which Nebuchadnezzar appoints his son Yechoniah to be the successor of the Jewish people, to be the king of the Jewish people, after which Nebuchadnezzar himself places Yechoniah into prison. It was in Baal, in Iraq, it was while Yechoniah the king was in prison under the rulership of Nebuchadnezzar, that Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash, burned it down while Yechoniah was in prison by him. In fact, Nebuchadnezzar, the Medrash says, never released anybody from prison. Nebuchadnezzar himself never released anybody from prison. Once Nebuchadnezzar locked you up, that was the end of it. It was eventually Nebuchadnezzar's son, a king by the name of Evel Meroidach, who eventually does release Yechoniah from prison. All right, not all the details are relevant for now. But the point of the matter is that the Torah says, in the end of Malachim Beis, the Torah says that when he was released from prison, when Yechoniah Melech Yehuda was released from prison by Nebuchadnezzar's son, Nebuchadnezzar's son, Evel Meroidach, would give him a piece of bread to eat. Which means that while he was in prison, he was basically starving to death. Okay. Here, I need to call your attention to a Medrash. This Medrash is actually in Vayikra, that tells the story of what happened while Yechoniah Melech Yehuda, who was again, by all accounts, a terrible Rasha, the son of a terrible Rasha, while he is languishing in a prison cell in Bavel under the rulership of Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel, who is in the middle of destroying the Beis HaMikdash, after the Rabbeinu Shalom Almighty God has sworn that there will be no more descendants from this family, from David HaMelech and from Shlomo HaMelech, that this would be it. Yechoniah Melech Yehuda was decreed by the Rabbeinu Shalom, he would be the last one of David HaMelech's descendants to live, and upon his death, Zera David would be finished, would be over. Ba'ois Hashah, says the Medrash, Vayikra Rabba, Parsha Yutes, Oisvav. At that time, Yoshvu Sanhedrin Gedola Al Daita, the Sanhedrin Agadol, has a meeting. Again, the Sanhedrin Agadol are also in Golus because Nebuchadnezzar, together with Yechoniah Melech Yehuda, has sent the Sanhedrin Agadol. Mordechai is among them, right? So Mordechai is together with Sanhedrin Agadol. They're sitting and they have a meeting. V'omru, and they say the following, quote, B'yomeinu Malchus Beis David Posekes. It's going to be in our day, that Malchus Beis David, the monarchy of David, will end? This monarchy of David, about which the Possuk says that it's supposed to last forever, it's supposed to be eternal, like the Shemesh, like the sun itself. It's going to be an hour clock, says it's not going to be an hour watch, says the Sanhedrin Agadol, that this Zera David is going to end, there's going to be nothing left. Manase, what should we do? The only descendant who remained, this Yechonia Melech Yehuda, is languishing in a prison cell in Bavel, under the imprisonment, under the incarceration of Nebuchadnezzar, whose prison cells had one-way doors, you went in and you didn't go out. And the Rabbi Shloim himself has sworn that there'll be no descendants from this. Neilech, said the Sanhedrin Agadol, let us go. Manase, what should we do? Neilech, said the Sanhedrin Agadol, let us go. Unafayas lagadelas. Let's go and appease. Let's go and talk to the governess. Hopefully the governess will talk to the queen. Hopefully the queen will talk to the king Nebuchadnezzar, and perhaps something can be done so that there is some descendant from this king, from Yechonia Melech Yehuda. All right. So they did. They went to the governess went to the queen went to Nebuchadnezzar, and the Nebuchadnezzar's wife petitions Nebuchadnezzar, when Nebuchadnezzar would, in an intimate moment between Nebuchadnezzar and his wife petitions him that he, Nebuchadnezzar, should allow, not Chas v'Sholem, that Yechonia should be released from prison. That was not an option. But that Nebuchadnezzar should allow that Yechonia's wife should be able to join him in prison, so that they would be able to have children. Says the Medrash, Sho'al HaKadosh Baruch Hu lebezdin shel Maila. When the Sanhedrin Agadol made this decision, made this attempt, and it succeeded, it went all the way up to Nebuchadnezzar. The Rabbi Shalom went to the Bezdin shel Maila and asked them that they should be matir neder. The Rabban Shalom asked the Bezdin shel Maila that they should release his vow. The Rabban Shalom said, I've sworn that this family will have no hemshech, will have no continuation. Be matir neder for me. And the Bezdin shel Maila are matir neder. Nebuchadnezzar allows Yechonia Melech Yehuda's wife to be lowered in through the roof to Yechonia. Nebuchadnezzar allows Yechonia Melech Yehuda's wife to join him in the prison cell. The Medrash says, I don't want to get graphic here, the Medrash says the prison cell was so small, there wasn't place for them to even lie down, physically. But the Rabbi Shalom had released the vow, and so Yechonia's wife joins him in the prison cell. Says the Medrash, listen here, I have to read this for you in the Lashon HaMedrash, because this is just no words. Kevon Shaboli Zokikla, as Yechonia and his wife are about to be intimate in the prison cell, after Nebuchadnezzar had given special permission, after he was petitioned by his own wife that Yechonia's wife should join him in this miserable cell. Omra, she told him, Keshoishano Aduma Ro'isi, she tells him, I'm Nida. We're not allowed. I'm forbidden to you from being physical with you at this time. I'm Nida. Again, we're talking about Yechonia Melech Yehuda. He was a Rosha ben Rosha v'mazokt. I mean, says the Medrash, Peirash mimeno. Yechonia heard that his wife was forbidden to him. He separated from her. Miyad holcha v'sofra v'tohara v'tovla. She was removed. She was lifted out of the prison cell. She was given time to count the requisite, the appropriate number of days. She went to the mikveh, and she was allowed back into the prison cell together with Yechonia, where they were together. And she conceived. Omar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Rabbeinu Shalom says to Yechonia, Birushalayim lo kiyamta mitzvah ziba. When you were in Yerushalayim, when you were king of all of Klal Yisrael, when you were able to go to the Beis HaMikdash, when the Jewish people, when everything was good, you didn't fulfill this mitzvah. Va'ato atem mekaymin, and now you're fulfilling it. Now you've all of a sudden remembered the covenant that we made at Har Sinai. Omar Rav Shabsai, says the Medrash, Lo izos mishom ad shemocha lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu al kol avonosav. At that moment, when Yechonya Melech Yehuda restrained himself from his own wife at a time when she was halachically forbidden to him, even though until this point he had been a Rasha ben Rasha, the Rabbanu Shalom says, the irony is not lost on me. Bistu in Yerushalayim, bistu in the Beis HaMikdash, you're a Rasha ben Rasha. But when you languish in Nebuchadnezzar's prison cell, now all of a sudden you keep the mitzvahs, now all of a sudden you remember who you are. Okay, says the Rabbanu Shalom, I forgive you for all your sins. And they had children. One children called Osir, which literally means a prisoner. Later they had another son called Shaltiel, which the Medrash says is reference to the fact that the Rabbanu Shalom had to be mater neder in order to allow these children to even be born. Al Oisa Shah Omar concludes the Medrash. On that hour it says, Kulcha Yofara Yossi Umum Einbach. The Rabbanu Shalom looks down at Yechonya Melech Yehuda and says, you're all beautiful, my beloved. Umumein boch, and there's no blemish in you. He was forgiven. Zera David, the Zera Shlomo continues, and from this, of course, eventually comes Melech HaMashiach. Yotze Sabas Koil, a voice came out of heaven. V'omro lahem, and turns to all the Jewish people and says, Shuvu bonim shevovim, return, O wayward children, return, O Yidden who have sinned. Erpa b'shuvay seichem, I will heal you from all of your sins. Do tshuva, learn from Yechonya Melech Yehuda. And you'll see, the Rabbanu Shalom says, just like Yechonya was forgiven, and the Rabbanu Shalom says, and I was mater neder, and allowed him to have children, so to Erpa b'shuvay seichem, all of your sins will be forgiven, and everyone will heal. I believe that perhaps one of the reasons why the Baal Haturim is referencing the story of David cursing Yoav is not because he wants us to look at the curses that befell Yoav. Like I said before, no curses befall Yoav. None of these curses befall Yoav. Yoav gets killed. The Gemara says they backfired on David. Oh yes, they did. And on his descendants. It's actually this specifically that the Baal Haturim is calling our attention to. Let's think this thing through. The Baal Haturim wants us to think about the story of Yechonya, because the story of Yechonya is here to answer and to really revolutionize our whole understanding on the story of Eglo Arufa. There's a problem. There's a challenge here with understanding the story of Eglo Arufa. It's all the Gemara says, the mitzvah, the whole thing, the Sanhedrin HaGodel, the local Sanhedrin, the Kohanim, everybody gets involved as a kapara. Kapara for what? He was murdered. He wasn't allowed to produce peiros. I mentioned before, the Gemara says, wait a second, what do you mean peiros? Peiros means children? What if he couldn't have children? What if he was too old or physically unable? Oh no, says the Gemara. Peiros means mitzvahs. Okay. Peiros means mitzvahs. Everybody, all of Klal Yisrael, right? The Possuk says, Al titein dam noki b'kerev amcha Yisrael, all of Klal Yisrael bear responsibility for this individual who was robbed of the ability to do more mitzvahs. Okay. I got a question to ask you. What if the person who's fallen in the field is a Rasha? Clearly, according to the Gemara, we might know things about this individual. We might know his age. We might know his physical condition. What if we know his spiritual condition? What if he's a Rasha? What if he is an individual who has not done a mitzvah in his life? What if he's not just not done a mitzvah in his life out of ignorance? What if he's a Rasha and a Rasha ben Rasha? What are you going to say now? You have to bring an eglo arufa? Because the murderer who murdered him, didn't allow him to do mitzvahs? This person does mitzvahs, this person does averos. From that perspective, if you want to get really sarcastic, you can make the claim that the person who murdered him didn't prevent him from doing mitzvahs, he prevented him from doing averos. And yet the Torah doesn't specify. It's all that if you find a tzaddik who is slain in the field, you have to bring an egla rufa because he would have done more mitzvahs, or at least the guy who davens with a minion, or at least the guy who, was careful not to talk lashon hara, or whatever the case may be. No! Anybody, cholol, Neufel basoda. By the way, the Hasidic masters all point out that Neufel basoda means that he hasn't just physically fallen in the field, but that he's spiritually fallen in the field. The field represents Esav. Esav, Ish Yedei Tzayid. Esav is Ish Soda. What's a Jew doing in a physical field alone? What's a Jew doing in a spiritual field alone? If this Jew was murdered in cold blood, he doesn't seem to have siyata d'shmaya. And yet we're so sure and we're so confident that no matter who the Jew is, there's a mitzvah that the whole hierarchy of Klal Yisrael, from the Sanhedrin HaGodel appointed by Moshe and Yeshua, all the way down to the local Sanhedrin, and all the Kohanim walk out of the Beis HaMikdash, they all wash their hands. And they bring a kapara on this Jew who sinned because it's been prevented from lo yinichu lasos peros. The kana ben shoyel. Here you got to ask yourself, lo yinichu lasos peros. What if he's the kind of person who's not producing physical peros and not producing spiritual peros? Why do we have to bring an eglo arufa for a rosha? So if the Torah would say you have to bring an eglo arufa because he's a Jew, that's it. So he's a Jew, that's it, doesn't matter. A Jew is a Jew and that's the end of it. But that's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara says the kapor is because he wasn't allowed to produce peros. And what's peros? Mitzvahs. No. What if all of his friends, what if all of his acquaintances reassure the Bezdin HaGodel this person wouldn't do a mitzvah, he couldn't do a mitzvah, nish gestoigen, nish gefloigen. The Torah does not discriminate. Oh no, says the Torah. Every Jew who's fallen in the field, who's been murdered before his day, requires a kapora on every single member of Klal Yisrael, and every Rav and every Rosh Yeshiva. Every Rav will leave his shul, and every Rosh Yeshiva will leave his yeshiva, and every Kohen will leave the Beis HaMikdash, and they'll all go to this rugged valley and wash their hands and beg the Rabbi Shalom for a kapora. Shelo hinichuhu lasos peros. Why? Says the Baal Haturim, I'll tell you why. Let me tell you a story. David HaMelech one day cursed Yoav. 5 curses. That from his descendants there would be Zov, Mitzayroim, cripples, victims of murder, and impoverished Chasrei Lachem. Of course, the Baal Haturim doesn't spell out the whole thing. He wants us to go learn. Open a Gemara, says the Gemara, the whole thing backfired on David HaMelech, and in the end this all happened to his descendants. Because David HaMelech unfortunately had descendants who were Rishoyim. And it got so bad that the Rabbi Shalom swore that this family is going to end here. When the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Yechonya Melech Yehuda was supposed to be the last one. The Rabbi Shalom took a neder. I don't want to get into it now, but the Mefarshim ask, how is this even possible? The idea that from Zerah David and from Zerah Shlomo is going to come Mashiach is one of the 13 principles of faith. And yet there it is. The Medrash says the Rabbi Shalom swore it's never going to happen. And this Rasha, in the prison, as he was languishing in the prison cell of Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel, as the Beis HaMikdash was being destroyed, this Rasha finally does tshuva. And from that moment of tshuva is born Mashiach. Lo yizaz misham, says the Medrash, ad shemochel until the Rebbeinu Shalom forgave him, al kol avonosav. As the Beis HaMikdash was burning in flames, Yechonya Melech Yehuda, languishing in a prison cell in Iraq, was doing tshuva. And as he did tshuva, him and his wife were in a prison cell where there wasn't space for a person to physically lie down. Not one person, never mind two. Right there, the seed of Mashiach is born. And as the seed of Mashiach is born, the Rabbanu Shalom cries out to every single Jew, Shuvu, Shuvu, Shuvu Bonim Shoivavim, return, do tshuva. Erpa Meshuvay Seichem, says the Rabbanu Shalom. Erpa Meshuvay Seichem, I will heal you. No matter how low, spiritually low a Jew has fallen, there's always healing. Even if the Rabbanu Shalom has sworn that there'll be no descendants, that there'll be no children, the Rabbanu Shalom will go to the Bezdin Shel Maila and ask the Bezdin Shel Maila to be mater neder. And from this will come Mashiach. Says the Baal Haturim, that's the reason why they have to bring an Eglo Arufa. It's because this Yid who's been killed had potential. He had potential, he had potential that was denied from him. He wasn't allowed to produce peiros. What if he was a Rasha? What if he was a person who couldn't, if he couldn't produce physical children, he couldn't produce physical children. What if he was a person who by all indication wouldn't produce spiritual children? Says the Baal Haturim, learn from the 5 klolos shekilel David liyoyav. What are we supposed to? That's why the Torah adds a hey. It's a hey to tell us that the important one is the 5th one. The klolos backfired. Oh yeah, of course they did. And they ended up in David's descendant. The 5th one was on Yechonya. And Yechonya was cursed with chasar lechem, with languishing in a prison cell. We didn't have a piece of bread to eat and was dying of starvation. And there, right there, he did tshuva. And for that reason, when a Jew is killed, no matter who the Jew is killed, no matter what the spiritual stance of the Jew is, he wouldn't be worse than Yechonya, right? No matter who it is, every Jew is obligated, from the biggest to the smallest, to go out to the field, to wash their hands on the Eglo Arufa, and to declare, this Jew had potential. From him could have come Mashiach. This Jew could have produced children. This Jew could have produced mitzvahs. This Jew could have done tshuva in the most difficult and darkest and painful of moments. In fact, very often, but dafka in the most painful of moments. And a bas koil would have come out and said, all Jews should be like him, and they will be healed and be like him. In fact, Mashiach, one day, ultimately will come from him. This answers the questions. The Baal Haturim is not just saying that David cursed Yoav because Yoav killed Avner. The Baal Haturim is saying that when David cursed Yoav, the curses eventually backfired, and David's descendants suffered from all of these curses, physically and spiritually. And nevertheless, when all was over and when all seemed to be lost, and the Rabbanu Shalom himself said no, Nebuchadnezzar's wife whispers something into the ear of Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar allows the Skion, the monarchy of David HaMelech, to continue. I only want to add one little knetch, one little nuance to this idea. The Arizal, I've mentioned this in some of our previous shiurim, I find this idea fascinating. The Arizal was Megala, the Arizal revealed to us something incredible. The Torah tells us very famously that there was an interaction between Shlomo HaMelech and Malkas Sheva. Shlomo HaMelech and a queen from Ethiopia, the Torah identifies her as Malkas Sheva, in English called Queen Sheba. And Shlomo gives it, the Torah says, Kol asher chafetz, everything that she wanted. And the Arizal revealed to us that Shlomo HaMelech and Malkas Sheva got married. And they had children. And one of their descendants in the end was Nebuchadnezzar. Which means that this individual Yechonya, who Hashem swore would be the last king, the last descendant of David, and the king Nebuchadnezzar, who locks him up and puts him in prison, they're actually cousins. They're both descendants of Shlomo HaMelech. And one day when Nebuchadnezzar, for whom the Chachamim refer to as one of the cruelest individuals in human history, when this individual, Nebuchadnezzar, one day his wife whispers in his ear and says, allow Yechonya to have children, allow Malchus David to continue, Nebuchadnezzar allows it. And Nebuchadnezzar's son, Evel Meroidach, one day releases Yechoniah from prison and feeds him. The same David HaMelech who cursed Yoav. The same Shlomo HaMelech who accepted these curses back on himself and his own family. The same family that produced Yehoiakim and Yechoniah, the terribly evil kings, also produced Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, their own descendants. Nebuchadnezzar, their descendant from David and Shlomo, is the one who is instrumental in seeing to it that the Melucha of David does continue, and that Yechoniah is allowed to father children, and that the seed of Mashiach is planted in Nebuchadnezzar's cell. And once again, in this never-ending kaleidoscope of the Ribbono Shel Olam's plan, we see the same thing again and again. But dafka, specifically when everything seems to be lost, and a Jew and you take a look and you see a Jew who's in the pit of darkness, in the darkest of places, physically and spiritually. Along comes a Nebuchadnezzar, who on the one hand is responsible for all the carnage and all the cruelty and all the destruction and everything. And Nebuchadnezzar himself instrumental in seeing to it that the family of David and Shlomo continues. And then Nebuchadnezzar dies. And Nebuchadnezzar's son, who of course is also a descendant of David and Shlomo, Evel Meroidach, releases Yechoniah from prison, feeds him, gives him bread. The tshuva is complete. The future is bright. And there's a kiyum, there's a hemshech for Klal Yisrael and for Zerah David. It's the Torah's way of reminding us once again never to underestimate the power, the potential of a Yid. No matter what type of situation they're in, noifel basoda, loy noida mihiko, cholol ba'adama, whatever the case may be, a Yid has infinite power. And even in a scenario where they're languishing in a prison where Rachmana litzlan starving to death, they don't have a piece of bread, they're chasar lechem, because a curse that their grandfather gave has come back on the same family, and they are terrible Rishoim. And the Ribbono Shel Olam has sworn that it's over. It's not over. The oath is annulled. The fate is transformed. The Yid does tshuva. And the seeds of Geula will sprout again. Wishing you all a wonderful Shabbos. Thank you.